I'd like to think we've all been there at least once, taking on the challenge of that one special workout that we knew would be super tough, believing ourselves to be equal to it. Like a true champ, we triumph, exiting the gym, feeling like a modern day Hercules, albeit on jello legs. We head home to revel in our personal best and enjoy whatever meal and supplements we feel deserving of before heading to bed. Fast forward, it's the morning. Overnight, it feels like building contractors have moved in and poured concrete where our thigh muscles used to be. Our calves feel strung like a ukulele, and our glutes feel on the verge of bursting. We realise that standard tasks like climbing the stairs, sitting on the toilet, and dressing or undressing will themselves become mini physical challenges that, with every twist, turn, step, and stoop, will have us regretting our Herculean quest the day before. Basically, we are suffering with a grade 1 strain injury and a condition of exercise-induced muscle damage, referred to as delayed onset muscle soreness, DOMS. Mistakenly, some have hypothesized this post-exercise soreness, usually kicking in around 8 hours after exercise, as being an important indicator of muscle growth, or have related the pain with the buildup of lactic acid during an intense workout. Both of these theories are incorrect. Hey, it's Alex, and welcome to the ISSN Graduate Diploma Podcast. Today, I'm providing a research review of a past paper from 2015 titled Effects of Powdered Montmorency Tart Cherry Supplementation on an Acute Bout of Intense Lower Body Strength Exercise in Resistance-Trained Males by Levis et al. Exercise-induced muscle damage occurs due to a disruption to the myofibril structure, which, for those unaware, is the rod-like structure that runs the entire length of the muscle fibre. Such damage results in reductions in strength, power, range of motion, swelling, soreness, and a flux of systemic enzymes and proteins. Together, both the trauma to the myofibril structure and increase in inflammatory cells associated with exercise-induced muscle damage stimulate the release of signals, satellite cells, vascular cells, and stromal cells to interact with each other in a bid to repair and remodel the damaged fibers. As a result, an increase in inflammatory cells and free radicals occur, the latter being fragments of molecules that contain an unpaired electron and are important signs of exercise-induced muscle damage. But, paradoxically, they are both key signals to aid adaptation and repair. You see, in the presence of strenuous exercise, increases in inflammation and free radicals that surpass our natural antioxidant defenses intensifies exercise-induced muscle damage and, as a byproduct, increases DOMS. This idea has led to the consumption of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds to reduce DOMS. Many athletes opt for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs such as Aspirin and Ibuprofen to help quicken recovery and reduce exercise-induced pain. In fact, in some high-collision elite sports, the psychological consequences of enduring constant soreness can lead to the addiction of some prescription painkillers. With this in mind, and the growing evidence supporting non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs potentially impairing muscle growth, a recent interest in antioxidant-enriched functional foods have been explored that provide a natural alternative. Tart cherries, due to their richness in phytochemicals, have drawn the interest of many research groups. This particular fruit has demonstrated benefits in reducing inflammation, oxidative stress, improving sleep quality, and with suggestions of clinical application too. In light of this, it has been proposed to offer anti-inflammatory and antioxidant benefits by reducing exercise-induced muscle damage and DOMS. With this information in mind, the main purpose of this study was to see whether a powdered tart cherry supplement would reduce muscle soreness, strength loss, and oxidative stress following a bout of resistance exercise. Let's take a look at the study. This was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial assessing 23 resistance-trained young males. To put the subject's resistance training experience into context, eligibility was determined if subjects had at least 6 months of previous resistance training experience prior to recruitment. Subjects were required to be able to perform a barbell back squat in a Smith machine of at least 1.5 times their body weight. Subjects were matched for relative maximal back squat, age, body weight, and fat-free mass. They were then randomized into 2 groups, receiving either tart cherry powder or a rice flour placebo. Supplementation was packaged in generic bottles, with subjects advised to consume either the tart cherry or placebo supplement 7 days prior to the intervention and 2 days post. All subjects were requested to refrain from non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs or exercise 48 hours before the intervention. The intervention consisted of 10 sets of 10 repetitions of a barbell back squat at the subject's 70% 1 repetition maximum, with a 3-minute rest between sets. In the morning of the intervention, subjects underwent fasted blood samples to assess markers of muscle damage, oxidative stress, inflammation, and clinical chemistry. Post-sampling, an assessment on each subject's ratings of perceived muscle soreness using a graphic pain rating scale was performed. With this assessment, subjects received standardized pressure on 3 locations of their dominant thigh and rated on a 10 centimeter scale how much pain they received from the pressure. The subjects then completed a maximal voluntary contraction, which is a standardized method used for measuring the strength of a muscle, on their dominant leg using an isokinetic knee extension machine. This occurred at baseline, the morning of the experiment, 60 minutes post the experiment, 24 hours post, and 48 hours post the experiment. All participants were asked to refrain from altering their dietary habits from the start of the supplementation. Dietary intake was recorded for 4 days and the first day after the exercise intervention. This was then reviewed by a registered dietitian and analysed for energy, macronutrient, and dietary antioxidant intake. Okay, so what were the results? Well, after the 100 repetitions of barbell back squat, as you would expect, both groups increased in their perception of muscle soreness at all 3 thigh locations, 48 hours post the intervention. Over the course of the intervention, the cherry condition was able to reduce perceptions of soreness at each time point post-exercise to a greater extent compared to the placebo condition. Assessing the 3 thigh locations independently, reductions in muscle soreness were only statistically significant on the vastus lateralis, which is the anterior muscle of the thigh, in the cherry condition compared to placebo for up to 48 hours post-lifting. Other locations such as the vastus medialis, which the listener may also know as the teardrop muscle, was trending towards a statistical significant difference in the tart cherry condition compared to placebo. Strength preservation trended towards favouring the cherry condition compared to placebo, although not reaching statistical significance in the maximal voluntary contraction assessment. A host of mechanical damage and physiological stress markers changed from baseline. However, serum creatinine and total protein levels demonstrated the only statistical significant differences from pre-lift values between the cherry and placebo group, whereby both increased over pre-lift values during the recovery period in the placebo group, but both decreased in the cherry group. Creatine kinase, an enzyme which is measured to assess muscle damage, increased in both conditions. However, despite no statistical significant difference between conditions, creatine kinase increased by only 98% in the cherry condition compared to 135% from baseline in the placebo group. Okay, I'm going to digress slightly, but this is practically relevant to the listener. In this study, blood markers such as alanine aminotransferase, aspartate aminotransferase, bilirubin, blood urea nitrogen, creatinine and creatine kinase all increased in the placebo group post-exercise and do commonly increase after high intensity or endurance exercise, remaining elevated for more than 24 hours post-exercise. With this in mind, if thinking of going to see your doctor for a health checkup, you should hold back on strenuous exercise a few days and rest before getting your bloods done. Finally, despite the rich antioxidant properties found in tart cherries, there was no difference in serum markers of free radical production and oxidative stress between groups. Pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines, which are a host of small proteins that act as messengers, were also measured and demonstrated no difference between groups. Immune-related blood markers demonstrated group differences, with lymphocytes reducing by 23% below pre-lift values post-exercise in the placebo condition, but only decreased by 11% in the cherry condition. White blood cells were also higher in the cherry group after exercise compared to placebo. What does this study really tell us? This was the first study to demonstrate that tart cherry supplementation in the form of freeze-dried powder may attenuate perceptions of muscle soreness and lessen the reduction in strength loss after a high-intensity, lower body resistance training bout in young, resistance-trained men. This study offers further support to the growing body of evidence that tart cherries may assist in remedying outcome markers of muscle damage and strenuous resistance exercise. Now, a key strength to this paper was the fact that the subjects were resistance trained. This is an important strength, as the most common efficacy for using such a supplement in a sporting context, in my opinion, would be to dampen markers of muscle damage and quicken the return to exercise in athletes with a busy, competitive calendar. For instance, in a study looking at perceptions of soreness in elite rugby league athletes, players remained in a perpetual state of post-match soreness throughout the entire playing season. In such a scenario, using functional foods rich in antioxidants like tart cherries as an alternative to analgesics could be of great benefit. A weakness that wasn't highlighted by the researchers and missed the eyes of peer review were the poor testing methods used in a bid to assess the biological relationship between markers of oxidative stress, muscle damage, and supplementation. Now, students and alumni of the ISSN graduate diploma will know that the use of total antioxidant status used in this study doesn't offer any insight into the true or total antioxidant capacity. For instance, the assay kit used to test total antioxidant status is created artificially outside of the body, and thus it's immediately influenced by atmospheric oxygen. Another flaw to this method is that the assay mainly measures small molecular antioxidant compounds such as vitamin C and uric acid, rather than antioxidant enzymes where the bulk of radical scavenging occurs. Another important limitation to this paper was the fact that many of the outcomes assessed were neither statistically corrected for and demonstrated no difference between groups. It puts into question whether no further outcomes were provided due to the inherent noise of some of the data, potentially resulting from the poor methodology used to quantify outcome measures such as oxidative stress. Now, with the discord between assessment of antioxidant testing and markers of muscle damage, perhaps the most reliable marker of a treatment effect is using the graphic pain rating scale. However, this method will be at the mercy of pain subjectivity. One subject's perception of moderate pain could be another subject's perception of unbearable pain. The limitations of this assessment in this study were further hampered by implementing no familiarization protocol. It's worth mentioning that the study was funded by the company providing the Tart cherry powder, with the corresponding author serving as a consultant for the company. However, this doesn't automatically present a red flag, and the findings sit in alignment with recent papers assessing the recovery effects of Tart cherries after strenuous resistance exercise, but it's important to bear in mind nonetheless. Finally, the results of this paper apply only to resistance-trained men. There does appear to be sex-based differences in relation to soreness and markers of muscle damage, which may be related to the menstrual cycle. As a result, further research on the effects of Tart cherry supplementation on women athletes need to be researched while controlling for the menstrual phases of the subjects. So what's the big picture here? This study provides the first insight into the beneficial effects of a novel form of Tart cherry powder on recovery and performance in resistance-trained men. The results of this paper also fall in alignment with previous studies in Tart cherry supplementation, where improvements in muscle function after strenuous resistance exercise have been performed. In the first study looking at Tart cherry supplementation, in a crossover designed 14 male subjects consumed 340 milliliters of Tart cherry blend twice a day or an apple juice placebo for 8 days and underwent eccentric elbow flexion. The results demonstrated that strength reduction and pain perception were significantly reduced in the Tart cherry condition compared to placebo. In the second study, assessing the effects of cherries on resistance training-induced muscle damage, 10 well-trained males consumed 30 milliliters of Tart cherry concentrate twice per day for 10 days and demonstrated that after completing 10 sets of 10 single-leg knee extensions at 80% 1 repetition maximum, in accordance with the results of the previous study, reductions in muscular force were attenuated in the Tart cherry condition compared to placebo. Such effects on cherry juice and accelerated recovery have been demonstrated in endurance performance too. In a study assessing 20 male and female runners performing a marathon consuming cherry juice or placebo for 8 days showed a greater return of lower body strength and statistical significant reductions in markers of inflammation in the cherry condition compared to placebo. The mechanisms proposed for the reductions in muscle damage following the consumption of Tart cherry supplementation are due to its antioxidant content, most notably its richness in anthocyanins. However, when assessing the presence of antioxidants in analysis, we were left in the dark in terms of where the effects of Tart cherry were yielding their magic in this study. However, it is clear though that Tart cherry supplementation is improving muscle function post-strenuous exercise. From a practical perspective, most of the present Tart cherry studies looking at the effects of resistance training-induced muscle damage have implemented long windows of supplementation with intakes of roughly 8 to 10 days. We have to also consider just how practical it is to impose such time durations on athletes who already have a range of other priorities to occupy their time. It's also important to remember that consuming Tart cherry supplementation daily can be expensive. From an adaptation standpoint, we have to remain cautious when advocating chronic intake of antioxidants given their track record with attenuating the adaptive response to exercise. Thus, the pertinent question that needs answering is, could chronic intake of Tart cherries also induce the same impairment? Now, as mentioned earlier, the negative associations aligned to the word oxidative stress and inflammation aren't always justified. For instance, a low to moderate increase from exercise offer an important signaling platform for skeletal muscle adaptation. For instance, the beneficial adaptive effects of oxidative stress to a cell is what is referred to as hormesis. Recent evidence shows that the increased oxidative stress derived from exercise offers an important mediated role in mitochondrial adaptation and increases the resistance of the cell to future stress. In fact, this process has even been given its own name, mitohormesis. In accordance with this, high doses of antioxidant supplementation have been shown to blunt the exercise-induced increases in mitochondrial proteins. Equally, the natural inflammatory response for exercise has recently been implied as another key regulator of adaptation. This has been supported by non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and cold water immersion, which both impact on the body's natural inflammatory responses, reducing markers of skeletal muscle adaptation. In light of the duration of dosage and the potential reduction of natural inflammatory and free radical increases that support adaptation, perhaps tart cherry supplementation only warrants a place during spells of intense fixture buildup, where short-term recovery exceeds the importance of long-term adaptation. Let's take, for instance, the 21 stages of the Tour de France, which equate to more than 2,000 miles of cycling packed into 3 weeks. In this context, athletes could experience high levels of oxidative stress, inflammation, and soreness in certain segments of the course. As a result, this response could impair force production and delay muscle fiber repair. With a rapid return to competing being of primary importance, then providing tart cherry supplementation a week before and every day during the tour may offer a beneficial way to increase the athlete's ability to recover. However, in scenarios where rapid return to competition outweighs physiological adaptation, then I'd be skeptical about advising such a supplement. Now, if you are going to use this supplement, then current research demonstrates that a loading phase of 5 days before the event and 2 to 3 days post appear to be where recovery benefits are most effective. In terms of dosaging, you'd be looking at 250 to 350 milliliters twice per day of tart cherry juice, or 30 milliliters in a concentrated form. Okay, so what should you take from this research? Well, tart cherry powder improved recovery and performance after 1 day of strenuous resistance training. But more studies need to be done to assess whether the antioxidant properties in tart cherry impinge on the adaptive responses to resistance training or other sport events. With this, research needs to establish whether dosing strategies can be reduced but still attain the same recovery benefits to ensure supplementation is practical for athletes. Importantly, the results of this paper only apply to resistance-trained men, with women potentially responding differently to the effects of muscle damage from resistance training, and thus further research on the effects in women post-strenuous exercise needs to be explored. Okay, that's all from me in this episode. Before I go, I'd like to thank a few key researchers from this insightful paper: Kyle Levers, Ryan Dalton, and Ifigo Galvan. Now, if you like the podcast, please leave a review and share it with your friends and other nutrition enthusiasts. And finally, I'd like to leave you with something to ponder for the rest of the day. It's a quote from the writer and entrepreneur Seth Godin from his great book, The Linchpin. You have brilliance in you. Your contribution is valuable, and the art you create is precious. Only you can do it, and you must. Okay, so here's a secret. The ISSN Graduate Diploma podcast wasn't my first attempt of a podcast, and before committing to either publishing a written blog or podcast episode once a week when this show started, I'd written hundreds of research scripts and blog posts that never saw the light of day. In fact, from 2015 to 2017, I spent most of my mornings reading and writing, creating helpful content, but just never posting it. The truth is, my perfectionism was preventing me from stepping up to the plate and posting. I was hiding from potential criticism. But I came to realize something. Something that's more painful than being criticized. I came to realize that I'd rather take the hits and know I lived out my passion of contributing than to spend my life hiding away with all this knowledge and only helping out the clients who pay for my services. The latter, of course, is easy to do, but if your vision, like mine, is to make an impact on the world, remaining comfortable and doing what's easy eventually starts to corrode on your sense of purpose and creativity. You have to be willing to take criticism and endure what's difficult. You have to be honest with yourself, knowing that we are by no means the finished article and that only by sharing and contributing can we attain the feedback to improve. The reality is, what we all produce will never be perfect. We must embrace this and carry a sense of humility in our limited understanding of the world, for many things are uncertain. You see, you shouldn't let the chance of being wrong stop you from contributing to the world. As subscribers of this podcast, we all have a degree of readiness and resources to contribute to our communities. So I encourage you all to do one thing this week. Have the courage to put yourself out there and contribute your knowledge to the world. You may just change the life of someone else. Okay, that's all from me today. As always, stay curious, think critically, and never stop learning. Thanks so much for listening.